Quickly, name the two biggest influences in your life. TV and internet. Surely not. Is it TV and internet? I don't think so. I think most of us, if we were pressed, what would we say? Faith and family, or something along those lines, because those are probably the correct answers. Hopefully they're the truthful answers, but they're probably the politically correct answers. So if someone says, name the two biggest influences in your life, you'd probably want to say faith and family, long before you'd want to say TV and internet, wouldn't you think? That's what I would think. Now, we have an entire Bible filled with the lives of individuals who put into practice the things that we desire to be. We're talking about people of the Pentateuch, and tonight we're going to talk about Joshua. And I think even though he was not a New Testament Christian, there are some aspects to Joshua's life that we could really learn a lot from and would perhaps make our lives a whole lot better. So let's talk tonight about Joshua. 4 things we want to do tonight. First, we're going to talk about Joshua the servant. Have you forgotten that Joshua was a servant? How do I know he was a servant? He was Moses' minister. Second, we're going to talk about Joshua the soldier and spy. He really was both, sort of interrelated, I guess. Third, we're going to talk about Joshua the successor. How would you like to take Moses' place? How would you like to step in those shoes? It'd be a little tough, wouldn't you think? But he did a good job. And then fourth, we're going to talk quickly about the support given to our lives by briefly surveying Joshua's life. So let's begin. Let's talk first about Joshua the servant. Though the Bible does not specifically say, there is very little doubt, and it's, I think you'll see, in fact, very easy to conclude that Joshua was born into servitude while the children of Israel were in Egyptian bondage. Now, how do you come up with that conclusion? I'll take you on one way. Do you know how much time is covered from Exodus chapter 12 through the end of the book of Deuteronomy? Do you know how much time is covered? Well, let's see if we can figure it out. Turn with me to Exodus 12. Let's start at verses 1 and 2. I want to show you a few passages here that kind of give us a good idea of the time frame. Exodus 12, beginning in verse 1, And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. So if it's the first month of the year, what does that tell you? This is the beginning, so to speak, of years for the children of Israel. Now look at Exodus chapter 40 and verse 17. How much time occurs between Exodus 12 and Exodus 40 and verse 17? Now what did Exodus 12, 1 and 2 say? First month, first of the year, so to speak. Exodus 40 and verse 17, And it came to pass in the first month, in the second year. So they began here. How much time is eclipsed? If they're in the second year, it'd be 2 years, wouldn't it? On the first day of the month that the tabernacle was reared up. So there's a period of approximately 2 years, wouldn't you say? Now, at least one, if not two. Look into the book of Numbers, chapter 1. And let's see how much time is covered in the book of Leviticus. Numbers 1 and verse number 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tabernacle of the congregation, on the first day of the second month, in the second year after they were come out of the land of Egypt, saying, and then you could read on from there. Well, how much time is covered throughout the whole book of Leviticus? 1 month. Because go back to Exodus 40 and verse 17. First month, second year, first day. Numbers 1 and verse 1. First day, second month in the second year. So the book of Leviticus covers about a month's worth of time. Well, what about the book of Numbers? Let's look at the book of Deuteronomy. Now, I'm going to make a point with how old is Joshua. We know how old he is when he dies simply because the Bible tells us. But he was probably born into Egyptian servitude and was not born during the wilderness wanderings. He simply wouldn't have been old enough. That's the point we're trying to make. Deuteronomy 1 and verse 3, and it came to pass in the, 40th year. Now, that's covered a little bit of time there, wouldn't it? See why Numbers, what happens in the book of Numbers? Well, it's implied in the title. The children of Israel were numbered on 2 separate occasions, but what happened in between those numberings? They wandered in the wilderness for 38 years on top of the 2 years that already were covered in the book of Exodus. And it came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, that Moses spake unto the children of Israel according unto all that the Lord had given him in commandment unto them. But then what about the book of Deuteronomy? Look in the book of Joshua chapter 4. Joshua 4 and verse number 19. And the people came up out of Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. Now you know the book of Joshua is about conquest. Who led the Israelites into the promised land? Joshua was the one who did it. Moses, the servant of the Lord, has already died. And the people came up out of Jordan, on the 10th day of the first month and encamped in Gilgal in the east border of Jericho. So Deuteronomy covers really no more, it seems, in a couple of months. They had 12-month years much like we do. So, there's no way that Joshua, with the next few verses that we're going to read, could have been born after the children of Israel came out of Egyptian bondage. Why? Because we're going to read in Exodus chapter 24, and really moving on in chapter 17, in the book of Exodus, where Joshua was leading the Lord's army into battle. Well, what was he going to do that as? A 2-year-old? Huh? No, he couldn't have. So when we talk about Joshua the servant, he was born in servitude in Egyptian bondage. And he lived through being delivered out of that servitude and lived through the wilderness wanderings. Now, permit me to share something that has always intrigued me, and I mean intrigued me in a good way. Moses was the servant of the Lord. Now watch. Deuteronomy 34 and verse 5. And turn with me to Exodus 24. I want to show you something interesting about Joshua. Get this in your mind. Moses was the servant of the Lord. Well, what was Joshua to Moses? Well, the Bible tells us. I'm going to make, I think, a pretty interesting argument. Exodus 24 and verse 13. And Moses, as he's called several times throughout Scripture, the servant of the Lord, rose up and his minister. Who was his minister? Who was Moses' minister? Joshua. And Moses went up into the mount of God. Now, the Bible also calls Joshua Moses' minister in Joshua chapter 1 and verse 1. So here's what I want to ask you. How do you minister to a servant? How do you minister to a servant? Now, to minister and to serve are often synonyms. Look at Mark 10 and verse 45 in the King James Version, and look at it in the New King James Version. He came not to, in the King James Version, to be ministered unto, but to minister. In the New King James, he came not to be served, but to serve. So therefore, minister and serve, or to minister and to serve, are often synonyms, and both basically mean to attend to others or to wait upon others. So what would that make Joshua? He was the servant of a servant. Now, are we not all the servants of righteousness? Read Romans 6, 16 to 18. And you determine. You're either a servant of sin or a servant of righteousness. I would think you would want to be a servant of righteousness. And then read Galatians 5, round about verse 13, where we're to serve one another. Now, what does that say that we're all supposed to be? We're all servants of servants. Keep that in your mind about Joshua, and especially Joshua the servant. But let's move on. In the second place, let's talk about Joshua the soldier and spy. Look with me in Exodus 17. Now that we know that Joshua is a little bit more than 2 years old, you can see why he was put in the position that he was. In Exodus 17, we'll read verses 8 through 16, but according to Moses, Joshua was already aged and experienced enough to choose out men and lead them into battle. Now, God certainly could have slain Amalek and his people without Israel, but Israel could not prevail against them without God's help. Don't forget that. God doesn't need us to accomplish anything. We need God if we're ever going to accomplish anything of any value. Exodus 17 and verse number 8. Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, choose us out men, and go now, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in mine hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him, and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Verse number 11. And it came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. Now it could be that Moses, the text doesn't say this, but as he was raising up his hands, perhaps he was praying. But the text simply tells us basically when Moses had his hands in there, what happened? Israel was winning. But you know, if you think about it, no matter how good a shape you are, you stand up with both your arms up in there and see how long you can do that. Just see how long you can do that. Now, watch what happens. But Moses' hands were heavy, obviously. And they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon, and Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands. It seems that they held his arms up. The one on the one side and the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua discomfited, there's some King James language for you, discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. That is, they overran them. They won the battle. And the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and, now look how Joshua's being led into that successor role, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua. For I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And you can read the rest of that at your own leisure. Now, when we put forth the effort required of us, we can rest assured that God will do what he's supposed to do. We don't have to worry about, is God going to help us? That's not the question. The question is, are we going to get up and go do what we need to do? God could have totally annihilated Amalek without Israel, but that's not the way he chose to do it. He wanted his people to get in there and do it. And when they got in there and did it, with the Lord's help, they got it done. Joshua had his role to fulfill, and others helped him. He didn't go out there and fight them by himself, did he? He was told to choose out men. But then Moses had his work to accomplish too, didn't he? But even Moses had to have a little help in his work too, didn't he? Do you see how even moving forward the church is designed as a body? You need me, I need you, we need each other. We have to have help, especially from our brethren. But now let's talk about Numbers chapters 13 and 14. And this is the inspired account where we have the 12 spies, one from each of the respective warring tribes of Israel. They were sent out to bring back a report of the things that they saw in the land of Canaan. So let's turn to Numbers 13. And I would like to read all of Numbers 13, 14, but we don't have time. And I think you're somewhat familiar with it anyway, so we'll just look at a few pertinent verses moving forward. Now, of those 12 spies who were sent out, one from each of the respective warring tribes of Israel, only 2 came back with a positive report, and that was Joshua and Caleb. Now, did they see, listen to what I'm asking, did they see anything different than what the rest of them saw? No, they didn't see anything any different, but they did see it differently. The 10 came back with a negative report and said, boys, we the land's all right, but the people there, well no, we're like grasshoppers in their sight. Joshua and Caleb came back and said, hey, the land's good, and if the Lord is with us, we'll just go get it. The Lord said this is ours. Well, let's go get it. Let's just go. Now Joshua for certain had already had experience in battle, hadn't he? He had already known that it took help, but if the Lord is on your side, you can't go wrong. But you know how it is with people, don't you? When there's 12 and 10 of them tell one story and 2 tell something else, who do you think the majority is going to believe? They're going to believe the 10. So let's get a brief, quick survey of Numbers chapters 13 and 14. Let's look at verses 1 and 2 of Numbers 13. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Send thou men, that they may search the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel. Of every tribe of their fathers shall ye send a man, every one a ruler. That is an important person among them. Look at verse 8. Of the tribe of Ephraim, Oshea. Well, we'll see what Moses ends up calling him, and you already know what Moses ends up calling him. The son of Nun. Look down to verse 16. These are the names of the men which Moses sent to spy out the land. And Moses called Oshea, or Oshea perhaps, the son of Nun, Jehoshua, or perhaps even more simplified, we know him as Joshua. Now, look at verse 17. And Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said unto them, Get you up this way southward, and go up into the mountain, and see the land, what it is, and the people that dwelleth therein, whether they be strong or weak, few or many, and what the land is that they dwell in, whether it be good or bad, and what cities they be that they dwell in, whether in tents or in strongholds, and what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, whether there be wood therein or not. And be ye of good courage, and bring of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the time of first ripe grapes. Skipping ahead to verse number 26. You can read this on your own. We're just looking. And they went and came to Moses and to Aaron and to all the congregation of the children of Israel unto the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh, and brought back word unto them and unto all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him and said, We came unto the land whither thou sentest us, and surely it floweth with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. Meaning, hey, this is a pretty good land. Here's the result of it. Nevertheless, verse 28, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there, and the Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Jordan. What are they seeing? Yeah, it's a pretty productive land, but there's some big problems here. And I'm not really so convinced that we can handle it. Well, let's go to chapter 14. And again, we're just hitting some spots. But look at verse 6 of Numbers 14. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were of them that searched the land, rent their clothes. That is, they're tearing probably their outer garments. And they spake unto all the company of the children of Israel, saying, The land which we passed through to search it is an exceeding good land. Now look at this. If the Lord delight in us, then who will? He will bring us into this land and give it us, a land which floweth with milk and honey. Only rebel not ye against the Lord, neither fear ye the people of the land. What's wrong with you? For they are bread for us. Their defense is departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Fear them not. Now, would that rally you up? Of course, we all know what happens. So we'd all hear that, and we'd all go, yeah, that's right. Joshua and Caleb are telling the truth. Verse 10, But all the congregation bade stone them with stones. How do you like that? Who's told the truth? Who really has conviction in what the Lord has already told him? It's not the 10, and the 10 have affected basically all the rest of it. Moses and Aaron, probably the exceptions, perhaps Miriam and some others. But by and large, the majority say they need to die. Where's the problem? The problem's not with us, not with what we saw. Get them out of the way. Let's stone them. But then the Lord intervenes. And the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of the congregation before all the children of Israel. Again, for the sake of time, look at verse 26. Numbers 14. And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, How long shall I bear with this evil congregation? Now, I see a lesson right there. You're dealing with the children of God, and what does God say about his own people? God says they're evil. Now, those who think that once you're a child of God, you can never do anything to lose your soul, how does God feel about that? He's upset with the majority of his children right here, wouldn't you say? How long shall I bear with this evil congregation, which murmur against me? I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel, which they murmur against me. Say unto them, As truly as I live, saith the Lord, as ye have spoken in mine ears, so will I do to you your carcasses. shall fall in this wilderness. And all that were numbered of you, according to your whole number, from 20 years old and upward, which have murmured against me, doubtless ye shall not come into the land concerning which I swear to make you dwell therein, save, that is, except for who? Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun. But your little ones, which ye said should be a prey, them will I bring in, and ye shall know the land which ye have despised. But as for you, your carcasses, they shall fall in this wilderness, and your children shall wander in the wilderness 40 years. Now, God gave them time for credit served from the crossing of the Red Sea, about Exodus 14, maybe a little bit before, and obviously in Exodus 12. But it took 40 years. Your children shall wander in the wilderness 40 years, and bear your whoredoms, until your carcasses be wasted in the wilderness. After the number of the days in which ye search the land, even 40 days, each day for a year, shall ye bear your iniquities, even 40 years. And ye shall know my breach of promise. Number 3. Let's talk quickly about Joshua the successor. That is the successor to Moses. I would highly suggest that you read Numbers 27, verses 18 through 23. Now, we're not going to read them. But what you'll see is there is what we would consider a public service. And I don't mean a public service announcement. I mean something similar to this. To where there was a public showing, and Moses simply did what the Lord told him to do, where Moses, in front of everybody, says, "This is my successor." He has made it clear that it's not up for debate. The Lord's already settled this. Here is the man who's going to take my place. And it's always good of the present leadership to publicly present the next generation of leaders to the people. Don't leave any doubt in anyone's mind as to who does what or who's going to be where or what, this, that. Make it public. That's a Bible principle. And it even goes back here into the Old Testament. There was no doubt concerning Moses' successor. And if you have any questions about that, go read the text and you'll see that Moses did exactly what God told him to do. But I want you to turn with me and read this one. In Deuteronomy chapter 31. Let's look at Deuteronomy 31, beginning in verse number 1. You know that Joshua was told at least 6 different times on 3 different occasions by 3 different individuals or groups to be strong and of a good courage. Imagine seeing the things that Joshua had seen. Imagine living through just being around Moses. How would you feel if you knew you had to take his place? And so from one way of looking at it, walk a mile, really about 10 or 12 in his shoes. How would you feel? It'd be a little intimidating. So Joshua was told time and again to be strong and of a good courage. And obviously this is an indication of how important he was to the spiritual success of the nation of Israel. Wonder if he was going to have courage or if he was going to bow down and be a coward. Let's see. Deuteronomy 31 and verse 1. Moses went and spake these words unto all Israel. And he said unto them, I am 120 years old this day. I can no more go out and come in. Also the Lord hath said unto me, Thou shalt not go over this Jordan. That's literally the Jordan River. Into the land of promise. And if you don't know why, go back and read and you'll see why. Verse 3. The Lord thy God, he will go over before thee, and he will destroy these nations from before thee, and thou shalt possess them. And Joshua, he shall go over before thee as the Lord hath said, and the Lord shall do unto them as he did to Sihon and to Og, kings of the Amorites, and unto the land of them whom he destroyed. Verse number 5, and the Lord shall give them up before your face, that you may do unto them according unto all the commandments which I have commanded you. Now look what he tells Israel first. Be strong. Be strong and of a good courage. It's going to be difficult. Even though we're here at the door, you still have to go across this Jordan, and you still got to go get what the Lord told you to get. Be strong and of a good courage. Fear not, nor be afraid of them, for the Lord thy God, he it is that doth go with thee. He will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. And verse 7. And Moses called unto Joshua, and said unto him in the sight of all Israel. Imagine being told this. Put yourself not in Moses' place. Put yourself not in the position of all the congregation. Here you are, Joshua. How do you deal with this? Be strong and of a good courage. For thou must go with this people unto the land which the Lord hath sworn unto their fathers to give them, and thou shalt cause them to inherit it. Now look at verse 8. And the Lord, he it is that doth go before thee. He will be with thee. He will not fail thee, neither forsake thee. Fear not, neither be dismayed. Now look at verse 22. Moses therefore wrote this song the same day and taught it the children of Israel. And he gave Joshua, the son of Nun, a charge and said, be strong. Go read Joshua 1, chapter 1, verses 1 through 9, and see where he's told this again. The Lord himself says these same words to Joshua. Be strong and of a good courage, for thou shalt bring the children of Israel into the land which I swear unto them, and I will be with thee. One of the greatest things that you read about Joshua is actually recorded in Joshua 24, verses 29 through 31. From being born into servitude in Egypt to influencing an entire generation for good. I said that correctly. He influenced an entire generation for good. Joshua indeed lived the full life. We should all pray regularly for those who follow after us. Do you do that? Do you look out across the congregation here and you say, this one's in his 60s, this one's in his 70s, this one's in his 80s. Who's the next line? Who are the next leaders? Who are the next elders of the congregation? What are we doing to be certain that there are men prepared and trained for what's to come? Moses did a great job. He prepared Joshua, and Joshua obviously did a great job. If you don't believe me, again, go read Joshua 24, 29 through 31. He influenced everybody, and even the elders that overlived him. They all stayed faithful to the Lord all the days, long after Joshua was gone. And that's when you know a man has a big impact and a big influence on people. He's been dead, and guess what? The people stayed faithful to the Lord. Hopefully we've influenced everyone's life in such a way that everyone will follow the Lord all their days, even after we have gone on into glory. Fourth, quickly, very quickly, let me give you the support given to our lives by briefly surveying Joshua's life. I want to suggest to you 5 words. I'm not even going to give you the scripture to go with it. 5 simple words. And when you think about Joshua, when you reflect back on these things, think about these things. Word number 1 should be pretty clear. It's God. Wouldn't you say? God. Even casually studying the life of Joshua, isn't it obvious that God was his everything? That God really was the center of his life. What's something we can learn from that? It worked for Joshua. You reckon it'll work for us? Give it a try. Word number 2 is giants. Imagine following in the footsteps of Moses. You want to talk about pressure? Wouldn't that be pressure? Here's Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. One of the greatest prophets ever. Top 3, probably even from asking anybody. Everything, all things considered, no doubt. And then here you have to be the guy who steps into his place. Would you be intimidated? I think so. But you know the key, when you really look at Joshua's life, how did he succeed? He relied on God, but he was always himself. And that's how we're going to succeed. Even though there may be some spiritual giants among us, and when they go on to glory, what are we supposed to do? You be yourself. You trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lead not unto your own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Be yourself. Word number 3 is guidance. Joshua listened to the right people, and here's the order in which he listened to them. God and Moses. 2 good people to listen to, wouldn't you say? And why would you listen to Moses? Because Moses listened to God. Now please listen to those who listen to God. How do we listen to God? We open up his word. This is how we listen to God. But when it comes down to it, we all need a face to listen to, somebody to talk to, who's going to verbally communicate back with us. Who do you need to listen to? You need to listen to those who listen to God. Why? Because everyone else will inevitably lead you into the path of selfishness. And if it's the path of selfishness, it's the path of Satan. Who needs to influence you? Who needs to give you guidance? New Testament Christians. Faithful New Testament Christians. Why would you listen to them? Because they read God's Word and go to God first. Word number 4 is grace. Lest we forget, no one survives or thrives but by the glorious grace of God. I wonder what Joshua would say. How did you win those battles? How did you make it through life? How did you step up and be the leader of Israel? How did you do those things? And I feel confident he'd say it was only by the grace of God. The unmerited favor of God. What did you do that was so great, Joshua? The best thing he'd probably tell you is I served the Lord with all my being. And when we do what's right, you can bet the unmerited favor of God will be upon us too. The word number 5 is glory. When you reflect upon that and you start seeing the type, antitype, the shadow, the substance, Joshua was privileged to lead physical Israel into the physical promised land, right? We serve someone who's better than Joshua. We serve Jesus. And Jesus will help us cross the Jordan of death. Now, what's waiting on the other side of the Jordan of death? Glory for those who follow Jesus. So we have something far greater to look forward to than the promised land. I mean the literal promised land, the land of Palestine. What do we have to look forward to? The land of endless day. Are we looking forward to spending eternity in the land of endless day with Joshua and others, by the way? Moses, all those faithful who've gone on before us. I hope so. While we may never fight in physical battles like Joshua, all those who end up in heaven have one thing at least in common. And everyone there did this simple thing. They got out of the way. Do you understand what I mean by that? They denied themselves. That means I have to get myself out of the way and serve God with everything that I have. Is Christ the master of your life? Do you know that for an absolute fact? Or are you still in the way? Let me tell you how you can get out of the way. It's pretty simple. You got to start somewhere. You got to hear the truth. Acts 18:8. You got to believe the truth. Acts 16:31. You got to repent of sin. Acts 17:30. You got to confess Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Acts 8:37. You have to be immersed in water for the remission of sins. Acts 2:38. And brethren, we got to be faithful. This is not a one-day, one-time thing. It's a lifetime, however long it takes. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will, that's a promise, give thee a crown of life. Revelation 2:10. Wherever you are, come now. As together we stand and as we sing the song of encouragement.